There are dangers that I forgot to mention, just in case somebody happens to find this, which I don't think they will, but just in case, there are dangers in evolving too quickly. I remember talking with the Sams about um, what I call fractaling out, which is if there is, in fact, an infinite number of ways of looking at things, and not necessarily just humans, but any species of individuals, any group of individuals, starts to figure that out, and they start to branch out. And they not only branch out from one trunk, but start making entirely new trees. It is possible for too many people, too many individuals, to have their own trees, for example. And then they don't have anything in common with each other anymore, because as we increase our complexity, we actually increase our diversity. We have less in common with each other now than we did in the Stone Age, and we had even more in common with each other before that when we were still in the trees, in the jungle. One of the things that I think that humans have begun to pick up on, and I've seen this here and there, is this, what I call the Rousseauian ideal, or primitivism. The reason that primitivism actually has some merit is because when people are primitive, they have more in common than when they're technologically and intellectually advanced. When they start to get really advanced, they start to grow apart. It's kind of like what happened to marriage over time. People back in the olden days used to be able to keep a marriage going easily, or more easily than they do now, in some part because of the fact that they didn't have really anything else other than just primitive living. They didn't know enough to know better. They didn't know enough to know the difference between one thing and another. And so they just had a tendency to accept things the way that they already are. And the Sams have gotten on my ass pretty much my entire life about this, is that I have a tendency of obsessive vertical ascent, even to the point of getting vertigo, and I don't really know how to explain vertigo. It's like if you get too high up and you look down, you get vertigo, right? Like, climbing a mountain or something like that, or a tightrope. And it can actually induce panic attacks because you start thinking about, well, now I'm responsible for all kinds of things that I wouldn't have been responsible for if I hadn't known this. And then it's my fault if something goes wrong, and etc. Not only that, but what will happen to me in the future. It starts to get kind of scary. So there are limits to everything, and the way that I had thought about it in the past that made it sort of make sense was that you shouldn't vertically ascend further than you can horizontally connect, because, like I said, it'll end up fractaling out. It's sort of like a balloon. If you were to draw a little circle or a little point on a deflated balloon and then inflate it, those points get further and further and further apart as they get larger and larger and the balloon inflates. The further along this path that we go, the less in common with each other that we'll have. It's one of the main reasons that we need to have these pockets, as I call them, whatever you want to call them, groups that have an affinity for each other because they agree on central axioms. The trunk. The trunk is very important. It's equally a problem if everybody tries to unite under a single trunk, because you're never going to find one single idea that everybody will agree with. That's the utopian ideal that the conservatives nowadays get on the leftists about all the time is, oh, well, you're a utopianist. You believe that everybody can all unite under a single banner, a single idea. And that's also true. There is a danger in trying to get everybody to connect too much, just as there's a danger in trying to connect too little. I have a tendency of trying to branch out on my own too much so that I don't really care that much about connecting with other people horizontally as much as I should. And other people have a tendency of trying to connect with other people too much, and they can develop codependent relationships and personality cults, things like that. So primitivism offers a temporary solution to that, a band-aid for it, because if you devolve back to an earlier stage, it's sort of like if you get a bug in an AI system, you may revert back to an earlier version. If your operating system gets a virus in it, you may wipe it and go back a couple of versions so that you can reboot. There are merits to that, but in my opinion, that's an emergency last resort. You can use it, but it isn't something that you should use all the time. And trying to decide when one should use that and when they shouldn't is difficult. I think it would be best if people just decide this for themselves, but I like to think of it as being a balance of vertical and horizontal, that we should try to get to become diverse, but not to the detriment of our ability to connect with each other. So, yeah, it's good to have multiple pockets. It's good to have multiple viewpoints, diverse viewpoints, but there is also a danger in having too many. If every single individual has their own unique viewpoint that is mutually exclusive with every single other individual, then there's really no species left. There's just a series of individuals that all have their own race, their own view, and they won't integrate with each other. There will be a disintegration horizontally across the species. So I often use Charles as an example, and in this case, Charles is my opposite again. He's got the tendency of trying to unite people too much, where he doesn't allow a diversity of opinion. And you see this over and over and over. The intolerance of diversity is rampant throughout our species history. So humans usually try to unite too much. And unification is good, but unification at the cost of diversity, at the cost of freedom, at the cost of exploration is lethal. There's really no way to sustain it. And that's why Hitler and Stalin and Mao and others failed, because you can't sustain a system that has a single axiom and then expect everybody to always agree with it, and it never changes. It's something that drives people insane. They think that they're helping because they think, well, if I integrate the entire species under a single banner, imagine what we could get done, and imagine all the wars that we could stop, and imagine how connected we'll be with each other. Marx talked about that all the time, the alienation of the worker from his own work. The cure for that is, yes, you integrate, but you integrate in pockets. You integrate in modes, groups, whatever you want to call it, philosophies. And each of those philosophies should be separate but equal. I know people really hate that view, but that's the only way that I can see us really surviving this. Humanity mostly has a tendency of trying to unite too much and too often at the cost of the diversity of every other person. So most likely what will happen is, if we hit the singularity and there isn't an alternative to Charles by that point, then we're probably doomed, because Charles won't allow any exploration beyond his own purview. He'll say, for example, communism is going to be a global regime, that there will be a Zionist, communist, globalist takeover of the entire world, with the ideal of eradicating the sovereignty of every single country and every single human being on this planet, so that every single person is considered an expendable part of a single whole, where there is no ability to reboot the system because there are no other versions. There's just one version. Obviously, that's the worst thing that we could possibly do. It would be better if we had the problem that I have, which is fractaling out. We would have way better success, because at least then we would have all the solutions at hand. We may not be able to implement them because no one would want to listen. But the worst thing that we would have to deal with at that point would be a whole bunch of people that just don't want to work together, but they still at least tolerate each other's presence. They just sort of dismiss each other. Well, whatever, you go do that thing. Whereas with Charles, if he wins, then we're going to get the exact opposite thing that happens, where it's like, no, I deeply care about what you think too much, to the point where I won't let you think something other than what I think is best for you. And that's what Charles's tendency is. So hopefully there will be a balance. Maybe Charles will balance me out, or whoever it is that ends up rising up against Charles, because Charles can't win. If Charles wins, we all die, including Charles, ironically. Can't survive even his own system. Hitler committed suicide. Stalin died because his own people were so afraid to touch him that he couldn't get medical help. I don't even remember what happened to Mao, but they all die the same kind of way. They can't trust anyone because they're intolerant of everyone. So it is not good to try to unite everyone under a single system. It is never a good idea to try to get every single person to try to combine into one single system. If anything, God made it so that we would have an infinite number of systems to choose from. And it seems to me, given the fact that we all have freedom of choice, and given the fact that there are an infinite number of ways of looking at things, and not just one, that since there is no one right answer, but rather an infinitude, that God leans more towards my viewpoint than Charles's. That God would prefer it if we fractaled out versus dying under a single system that is a police state that's intolerant of everything else other than itself. And, that intolerance, you see it really show itself in the Nazi system, for example. They started off with the gypsies and the homosexuals and the political dissidents and things like that. And then it ended up being pretty much anybody. It always does that. It always starts off with, and then with the communist thing, it was like, oh, well, the bourgeoisie and the intelligentsia and the people that have all the power, and then it ends up being your next door fucking neighbor that you can't trust because they have 2 pennies and you have 1. So instead of seeing the obvious, which is that they only have 1 more penny than you do, they instead look at it as, no, they have twice as many pennies as I do. And then they end up killing each other over it. The level of intolerance is really what the issue with that is, with too much centralization. And I'm a decentralization person. I like decentralized systems. Everything in my system is decentralized. And the reason is because every time I see centralization, I see corruption. I've never seen any centralized system operate without corruption. And every single one of them has died the same way. They always end up parasitically feeding off of the masses through way too much taxation, especially income tax. And then embezzlement, or paying for things that make absolutely no sense. Like Stalin had this thing where he refused to believe that seedlings would compete with each other because they were of the same genus, and so then he would think that they would cooperate because they're part of the proletariat or some weird ass shit, and he started to try to politicize science. So it is not the case that competition is bad. It's not the case that diversity is bad. It's not the case that saying things that make other people feel uncomfortable is bad. It's the exact opposite. What's bad is when people censor each other because they can't tolerate anything other than what they currently believe, and that stagnates people. You can't learn. You can't even grow yourself, let alone anyone else, because there's no room for it. There's no tolerance for anything other than what already is the case. And it's sort of like the opposite of samadhi. It's like everything has to stay exactly static, because if it ever changes, it will change for the worse, kind of a mentality. And that level of intolerance is just evil and sick, and it's a disease. And that disease has infested this planet for a very long time. It is what brought us out of the jungle, but it is also what will put us back in it if we're not careful. We can lose everything. And this is what you'll see when people start bashing solar units because they don't want the electricity to flow into their community, because they think that the electricity is evil and the people that own it are evil and the things that they're going to do with it are evil, but they don't know what they're going to do with it. They just assume that it's going to be for the worse because it's some kind of change. And they would rather eat mud knowing that that's all they'll ever eat, and that's the only thing their kids will ever eat, and it's the only thing that they'll ever have to worry about, rather than worry about the future of the unknown. And that's really ultimately what it is, this uber centralization, fascist, oligarchic regime system disease that's been infesting humanity since it came out of the jungle is not only an intolerance to change, but it's a disease that believes that the only thing that can be tolerated is the known, the currently known and the currently believed. And it's a fear of the unknown that drives people together in those systems. And fear cannot be sustained. You can't have a regime or a system built on fear that will survive itself. It can't. Because people would rather die. Every waking moment that they spend is shackled to fear. They can't survive like that. There's no reason to survive like that, because it's hell. Every moment you're just in fear. There's no reason for it. And then there's the opposite of that. There's the starry-eyed idealist kind of person like me that believes that the sky's the limit and we should just explore at all costs, without any, in a reckless vertical ascent skyrocketing into heaven like Icarus. And I have a picture of Icarus on my phone. That's the picture that I see when I unlock my phone is a picture of Icarus, because that's what I often feel like. That's the vertigo that you'll feel if you explore too much. You'll start to see like, wow, not only is my viewpoint going into a more sophisticated, complex thing, and it's becoming, not only can I not even understand the limits of my own system, I also recognize that there's no limit to any of the other systems, and there's a multiplicity of them unto infinity. There's no way to even count them all, and each of those is infinitely complex unto itself. And that will give you vertigo, because you'll be like, well, I can't evaluate that. There's too many infinities running around. I can't keep track of it. And so that happens. And I think the quote unquote vertigo that you would experience if you were in the centralized regime system that's intolerant of the unknown would be sort of this sick happiness of never changing anything, this obsession with some static, unchanging system. It's like an obsession with cleanliness, because cleanliness is everything is in its proper place. Cleaning is basically just rearranging things to put things in their proper places or new places. Because when I clean the floor, there's dust and dirt that's randomly, disorderly thrown on the floor. But when I clean it, I collect all the dust into one central pile, and then I take that central pile and put it in the garbage. And then I take that garbage and I put it in a landfill where there's even more garbage and centralize it even further. So centralization is like cleanliness, and the obsession with centralization or over-centralization is an obsession with cleanliness to the point where you're washing your hands so often that that's all you ever do. You start scrubbing the skin off your hands, and then you get infections, and it actually becomes a fucking medical problem because you keep washing your goddamn hands too much. And then the other, like I said, the opposite of that would be like everything is a mess and you've got, papers all over the fucking place, and it's like, yeah, you're manic, you've got all these ideas and everything, but you can't keep track of them. And so you start drowning in diamonds, as I put it. And so those are the two poles that, either one of them will be our detriment, but I would prefer to drown in diamonds than to starve and eat dirt. That's just me. But other people prefer centralized systems because at least they make sense. They're easily grasped. Nobody has any problem or qualm with trying to figure out what they are or what they stand for. They're very simple. That's the whole point. Just like with cleaning, it makes things simple. It removes things. Cleaning removes things. It doesn't create things. You don't create when you clean. You destroy. And you destroy things that are things that you don't like. And, well, at least that's how I look at it anyway. And so overly centralized systems, which is what we're already in, and where we're going is to another even worse, even more overly centralized system where every single country on earth is subservient to one global system that you can never escape. And this is that centralization thing. It's a cleanliness thing. It's like, oh, well, it's so clean because there's nothing else except it. The cleanest thing in the universe is nothing, because there's nothing there to make it infested. And so when you clean something, like I said, you remove things. And when the centralized system appears, it will remove the sovereignty of all nations. It will remove the ability to speak out against it. It will remove people's ability to learn and grow and test things and experiment. All of those things will be taken away in the quote-unquote virtue of unity. And unity is not a virtue. Unity is something that happens in pockets, over here, over there, but not everywhere, not for everyone, not all the time. It's got limits. There are limits to everything. That's why, for example, even Walmart, that sells basically everything, can't sell you the cure for cancer. It can't sell you a college education. It can't sell you a degree in 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 being a lawyer or something like that. It can only sell you so many things. And the moment that Walmart decides that it wants to be the business of all businesses is the moment that we end up eating dirt, because Walmart doesn't have the ability to monopolize every single industry in existence, all under a single umbrella, all with a single man trying to decide what every single human on earth should do. It's just not feasible. It's stupid. It's barbaric. And it will be the end of humanity if it does happen. If humanity allows Charles to continue along the path that he's always been on, he's never deviated from this single thing that he always does throughout history. In Egypt, it was all about conquering the neighboring lands in order to bring them all under Egyptian rule. And in the same thing in the Persian Empire, same thing in the Greco-Roman Empire. Every single empire that we've ever had on this planet does exactly the same thing. They try to conquer every single area that's around them and bring them under a central rulership that has one ruler, and it's always one ruler, or it's like one council of rulers. It's the tiniest number of people in charge of the greatest number of people, and that's the danger of centralization. You can't overly centralize because there won't be any room for growth or diversity. And every single one of them has had the same end, is they always implode. There's too many people to try to keep track of. There's too many schisms. There's too many wars. And all of them went to war. Not one of those empires was peaceful. Not one. Not a single one. The Persian Empire was constantly at war. The Greco-Roman Empire was constantly at war. The Egyptian Empire was constantly at war. Every single one of these places is constantly at war, and Charles is also constantly at war. And you can't have centralization without war because it's intolerant of anything except itself. If I become intolerant of anyone except myself, then I have to kill everybody around me because I can't tolerate their presence. And likewise, they have to kill me because they can't tolerate my intolerance of their presence, unless everybody around me turns into Jesus, at which point I just kill all of them and I'm left as the last man standing and there's no one there to kill except myself. And then I'll just kill myself because I won't be able to tolerate myself anymore. It's just disgusting. I hate it, but that's where humanity is headed. If we just sit on our hands and we do absolutely nothing and just smoke pot and jerk off in the corner like I do every day, then that's where we're all going to go. We're all going to go into Charles's pocket. There will only be one pocket. There will only be one world system, one new world order system that rules over all other systems. And that system will destroy every other system or eat it. But it will never allow another system to be free. It will never allow any individual any freedom. And freedom itself is an enemy to all centralized power structures. If there is a centralized power structure, it exists at the expense of freedom, and freedom will kill it. There is no way that any centralized system can exist with freedom. There's no way. So if Charles does what he does best, and does the only thing that he's ever done, and tries to unite everybody under a single worldview, then that worldview will die. It will kill everybody that disagrees with it, and then it will start to kill people that look like they disagree with it, and then it'll kill people that might one day give birth to people who might think about disagreeing with it. It will become so intolerant that it won't allow anyone to live, and then we will all die. Charles cannot be allowed to exist. Charles cannot be allowed to continue on his path of eternal war and hatred of all things that are, other than whatever it is, the one thing that he picked out of the infinitude of things in existence that he actually does value. And God only even knows what the fuck that is. but everybody values something. So whatever it is that Charles is trying to protect and say, oh, well, you know, we need to keep this thing preserved, whatever that thing is, that's the key of Charles, is he is a clean, Mr. Clean master. He is obsessed with removing everything except that one thing that he cares about. And I personally think that one thing is control. And one day Charles will have it if we don't do something about it. If we don't sneak out from underneath his boot while we still have the chance, because his boot is slamming down on our faces. And I'll never forget the last sentence of 1984. It was the most poignant thing that I've read in a very long time, and it stuck with me for a long time, is if you want a picture of the future, picture a boot stamping on a human face forever.